Hello, friends and neighbors. This is DJ's Album Share, and I'm your host, DJ Roller, and welcome to episode 17. This week, I'm joined by Brian Caperton, also known as Delaplane. You can check out his music and his upcoming dates at delaplane.com. That's DELAPLANE.com. He's a really great musician. He's doing a lot of cool things around the city as far as open mics and stuff, so go check that guy out. Give him some love, man. Stream his music, man. A great musician. We had a really interesting conversation about two different albums: Bon Iver's self-titled album, Bon Iver, and Fleet Fox's Helplessness Blues. I had a great time. Had a little bit of an audio issue, but we'll fix it in the future. If you guys are watching on YouTube, make sure you're subscribing, liking, commenting, sharing, all that good stuff. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any other streaming platforms, make sure you're following along so you can see when the new episodes come out. And the best way to support the podcast is to support our sponsors, guys. So appreciate you guys, and I hope you enjoy the episode. This podcast is brought to you by Carolina Sea Salts. Specializing in smoked sea salts, their products can be found at Etsy. Just search Carolina Sea Salts, look for the smoked sea salts, and tell them DJ sent you. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming on the show, dude. I appreciate you coming on. Welcome to the Orange Room, Brian.
Oh, man. Channel Orange.
Yeah, dude. So one of the most interesting things about these two particular albums that you and I picked, the album that you picked, Bon Iver, self-titled album, Bon Iver, and Fleet Fox's Helplessness Blues. One of the most awesome things for me personally, and most interesting things for me personally, is that genre of music in that time period. Because I'm like, for me personally, I'm just like getting out of college, 2011, like that, like early 20s vibe. And this was very influential music for me personally, listening to it, because I was really into folk music and acoustic folk music, and really learning kind of what was available at the time for doing like folk music was kind of interesting, right? Because I was really exploring, like, okay, I don't have to just play mandolin and just play bluegrass. I can do a lot of different things. So this album,
Were you playing in Richmond? Like in 2011, that's when these records came out.
Right, exactly. No, I was not. I was playing in like Southwestern Virginia. So like I said, like these albums were very influential for me personally to be like what you can do with folk music. And so, in particular, the Fleet Foxes album, because I love the Fleet Foxes. So, my biggest thing going forward with the Bon Iver album was what really, before we dive into the album, what was really your intro into this artist and particularly this album?
Yeah, it was a Paste magazine, and I remember I would go to a Borders in Warrenton, and like Warrenton didn't have a big bookstore. It's like a really small town. It's like the last small town kind of before you get to like urban Arlington, DC area.
Nice.
And so they built a Borders, and I would go and I would pick up all the newest CDs, and I'd pick up Paste magazine, which had little, inserts. I think it was like 2009 or something, and he being Justin Vernon, the guy
Vernon, right,
who writes as Bon Iver, this guy from Wisconsin.
There's a really interesting backstory and stuff, which we'll get into, but go ahead.
Yeah, it all kind of speaks for itself, and there's so much said already about this guy and his story. It's almost like mythological now.
It is pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, it's like its own mythos, but like, yeah, so I was just like really obsessed with going to Borders, getting Paste magazines, and I would like throw them in my car and just like sit in the parking lot and listen through CDs. I did it.
Nice.
I remember that like the National like Boxer came out, and there's a Paste magazine cover, and it was like it had a picture of the National, and it was like, this band made the best record of the year, and it wasn't Radiohead, because I think Radiohead had just come out with radios. It was Boxer by the National, and so Paste turned me on to like the National and all these cool like indie bands. And man, I threw in that Paste CD, and I heard a clip from, I think it was maybe Flume or Skinny Love. It was probably Skinny Love, because that was a single. When I heard that guy's voice, it was like the first time I heard a few artists, and I was thinking about this beforehand. My dad showed me Prince as a kid, and it shook me.
Yeah,
Like
well,
hearing Prince's voice, because
definitely.
it was so effeminate and beautiful and delicate and like gender fluid and dynamic. And I just as a child, I had not wrapped my mind musically that someone could make their voice sound like that. Nina made me feel that way, and like I'm trying to think about who else. Probably like those two, but when Justin Vernon's voice, you just put it on, you're like, how? That's beautiful.
It's tons of like editing and like there's tons of things that add to what his voice does, and it's amazing because you're talking about them doing this album in like a home, like basically a built studio that they built, right? Which is so inspiring from like a solo musician's perspective when you're like, dude, these guys, him and his brother bought this like veterinarian clinic and like refabbed it into like a studio in Wisconsin for this specific reason for him to sit down and record music, which I always thought was like really cool when I dived into the album, right? Was like, damn, man, like I kind of have that DIY thing myself, obviously, with what we have going on here, right? So I relate to the artist being like, I don't want anybody to tell me what I'm going to do. I'm going to do what I want to do. You know what I mean? And if it takes me having to build whatever, I'll just do that. So that was a really cool vibe that I got from the album. But in particular, before we dive into the music, like what type of impact? I'm trying to get more into the journalistic side of this particular thing, right? Like, and to me, like I've been struggling with how to ask this question, but like really the best way I can kind of ask is like, if any at all, what type of impact has that album in specifically had on you musically, or even just personally? Like it doesn't have to be musically, it could be just personally, but musically in general, because I know, like I've heard your music, dude. You're amazing to me personally. Like listening to you play, I was like, wow, like I love your stuff. And so just in the brief times I've heard you play, I can hear a little bit of influence, me personally. So I was just curious, in your own words, how much of an impact has this album had on you? Or in what way, maybe?
Yeah, no.
It's a hard question to ask, and it's a hard question to
appreciate
answer. I understand, but like
Yeah.
I'm trying to just really delve into. There's got to be a reason why you picked this album, and also I can kind of hear an influence behind it as well. So it's like I'm curious.
Well, thanks for making that connection. I really appreciate that, and I love the dude's music, and I think that I get really like obsessive and passionate when I'm talking about a piece of art that I really like. And
You too.
Yeah. I think like artists do, painters do, dancers do, musicians do, and this record just came to me at the right time and place. Like I heard that guy back in 2009. It was like high school, and then kind of went to college, and there was like a little turbulence and kind of like a little fall out of college for me, just kind of like a falling away. And I think it was that summer after kind of that falling away where, I'm really excited for this record. I'm kind of wondering what it's going to be like. And it just really delivered. I think it was also my first summer away from home. I think 2011 was my first, because I remember like first year of undergrad, I stayed home because I was at JMU. I was like in Harrisonburg, so
Right.
Shenandoah Valley. And that's another thing, like this record arrived at a time when I was living in the Shenandoah Valley, and like it's a topical record. The songs are named after like imaginary places.
Yeah. That the way that what I was reading was like the places are people, or like they can be described as people, or it just
it's almost like a fantasy place,
right?
Like, and like even the title
It just
of
becomes the
record,
pronoun, right? Like it's not
Right.
necessarily a person, place, or a thing. It's all of the same thing, right? Like it's just a
Yeah.
thing,
And when it's so, I love how beautiful, and like it just feels so well thought out too. Like I love when like the cover art kind of matches the theme,
Definitely.
and you kind of stare at it, and it's like, this guy's writing music, and he wants people to feel like you're in a place, like you're kind of inhabiting it, I think.
Right.
And I don't mean to sound like kind of heady when I say that, but yeah, when I was like throwing that record on and like driving around the Shenandoah Valley and like
That's your jam,
these
dude.
mountains, it was just,
I think that's something that we can all relate to, is because like there's for me personally, there's always been the album and the memory. So there's always been a piece of music that you listen to, and then some memory that it brings back, right? So that's part of why I think these albums almost are as influential as they are to us, right? Because it's not necessarily just the music itself; it's also the memory it brings back, the time period that you listen to it in, and I think it's very true for me personally with the Fleet Foxes album because it's like. That was like you're saying. That was like I was kind of in the same time period where I'm getting out of college, 2011. Like it was kind of weird for me personally as well. So like that album really spoke to me. So it's pretty interesting that it was very similar for us. But to the Bon Iver album, it is technically the second studio album recorded in Falls Creek, Wisconsin. And they call their studio April Base Studio, which is pretty cool. It was released on June 17th, 2011. And it's been called the most ambitious musical departure from the first album, which is pretty interesting. But like you said, the album art was by I'm gonna mess this guy's name up, Gregory E. Clyde.
Yeah, he's a Minnesota artist, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, dude. Like I love it when us as musical artists, we do respect visual artists as well. So it's like when you can collaborate with a really good artist. My girlfriend is a really, really good visual artist. So it's like it's really interesting kind of picking her brain when I know nothing about that stuff, So it's like I love it when they can collaborate on a similar level. Mm-hmm. So yeah, this album won a Grammy, I think, for 2012's best alternative music album, which is pretty wild as well. But what are some of the songs off the album that really like jump out to you? I've got a couple here myself, but I'm just curious if you have any that really like stick with you. Or I'm a big person where I like to listen to the album from front to back and really kind of go on the adventure. But also, too, there will be highlights throughout the album that I'm just like, I like this, I like that. So I'm curious.
Yeah. I just wanted to go back to one quote that you read, and that was like just the musical leap forward between the first and second record.
Definitely, absolutely.
That, I think, is also just worth noting. And what I love as a songwriter, the evolution of like his discography and how he tells these stories through music, and like the records are always kind of whole in their sound, but he's always kind of doing something a little different. And
I think you have that with a lot of times with seasoned musicians, which this guy obviously was. He was in multiple bands before Bon Iver like took off, right? Like I feel like when you have musicians who've been at it for a long period of time, they know that change is a part of what we do. It's not staying stagnant. This doesn't that doesn't do a lot for musicians. You know what I mean? Like, at least the seasoned musicians I've been around understand that. So I feel like that's kind of maybe, for me personally, listen to his music, he's like, all right, that was great. What we did is just great, but we've got to keep it evolving. We've got to keep it moving,
Yeah, like I think that a major contrast that I hear between the first record, it's called Forever Forever Ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think everyone knows he like recorded it in some kind of like cabin.
Yeah.
Mastered a little bit and threw a few instruments on in post production.
Right.
But a lot of that record is like vocal driven.
Mm-hmm.
And so you kind of hear the parts it's really interesting to listen to as a songwriter and as a composer too, because you realize this guy's not only a great songwriter and a great lyricist and an interesting lyricist, but he's a great composer. Like he has kind of a choir or a band background or something where he really can like take parts and throw them together in interesting ways, and the harmonies on the first.
I see that now that you say that. That's God, I love this. That's what I'm doing this for.
And they're bizarre too. Like seriously, like it's not things.
It's not standard stuff. It's very interesting transitions.
Atmosphere. It's like when I watch like a good movie. And
oh my gosh.
Like when I watch a good movie and I'm like, why did the cinematographer choose to like bounce the light off that way? And like I'm not always thinking that, but like it'll just strike you with something
certain times
strange or uncanny, and like I love how his music does that. It's like beautiful, but it's sometimes like a little like strange and like even ugly sometimes.
I mean, I've always heard other people who talk about composition of music, and that's the job is not to always make happy music. you know, or make music that makes people feel happy. You're supposed to make them, if you're a composer, you're supposed to understand how to make them feel uncomfortable and sad, and then bring them back into happy almost. You know what I mean? Like real composers, because I'm a self-taught musician completely 100%. So when I have seeked out, luckily I've grown up in the YouTube age that you can look stuff up and you can listen to actual legitimate musicians talk about this stuff, and you can learn from them. And I've listened to actual composers talk about this on videos where they're like, a real composer should have the ability to go through a range of emotions and bring you back to a happy place or a sad place or whatever you're trying to convey. You should be able to control the environment and convey your emotions, which is a credit to what you're saying, because he is really. I hadn't picked that up until you said that. He's a huge. He does treat his songs as a composition, much less like just generally like writing some folk music, which is amazing.
Robin Pecknold from Fleet Foxes and Justin Vernon are like that, and I think you see a lot of really talented singer-songwriters who are able to do that. I mean, like Billie Eilish. I mean, like Kanye West.
Definitely. I mean, he collabed with Kanye too, so you know.
Yeah, they just have minds where they can like realize songs, and I feel like it's just interesting. Like they're just.
I think it's a layering. In my perspective, it's a layering issue, right? So if you were to draw something, you would draw the layer. You would draw the background, and then another layer for the foreground, and another layer for the person, right? So the best way that I can explain it is they think of music in that way, as layered, and so like that's very interesting, because I can't, like, I have just now started to learn to play piano for the first time in my life, to where it's like I kind of understand layering, right? But like the way we're discussing it right now, it's much more advanced, to where they're moving with percussion, woodwinds, and like all the orchestral instruments at that point as well, because there's tons of like stuff. One of the things for me was Wash. One of the songs for me was Wash, because of the melodies on that song, of how he uses the melodies and the strings and the orchestral stuff, and he just moves everything and it waves. Like, those were one of the things where I was listening to where I was like, oh my goodness, that was amazing. And you conveyed it so nicely, to where it's like, yes, he's a composer at this level. I couldn't even. I understand what you're saying, and I had the thought without even understanding how to say it earlier, which was really, really interesting. When you said it, like a light bulb went off for me. I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what it is, man. Mm-hmm. He's a composer on multiple levels. Yeah. And man, it's so interesting. His album is amazing.
Yeah, it's very compositional. Like, you could almost hear it performed by. You could hear it performed by a full orchestra, or just sort of like a dude on his guitar. It would still convey a beauty.
Yeah. And you know, one of the other songs, Towers, that was one of the other ones for me that was like, I'm really into. I've never really been into anything that's considered mainstream, so it kind of sucks when I'm doing research on these things and I was like, the most acclaimed song off this is this track, and I'm just like, all right, well, I'm not gonna like that, you know, but I'm just a diva about it. So it's like I always try to pick the tracks that are kind of not necessarily the most acclaimed, but Towers for me really did it. And honestly, the last track that on the album, Beth/Rest, it's so like retro 90s and 80s. Like, I had to like talk about that. Like, it was like when I was listening to the album, the whole album had a feel and everything, and then you get to the last track, and it's just like going back to the late 80s really quickly. It felt like was that guy oh man, I can't even think of the guy who did Sledgehammer in the late 80s. I wanna be Sledgehammer. Like that. It felt like that with the synth and stuff, dude. It just you know, to me personally, like, I was just like, this is a throwback album or a throwback song, you know, like that track. Anything else about that album that really jumped off the page for you before we transition?
Yeah, I think the first three songs are kind of my favorite, just because of how interesting and oh man, I could listen to them all over and over. Yeah, there's this line in Holocene. It's like, and once I knew I was not magnificent. I can't even say it. But it's a great line, just about humility and man, it's just a great line. It's a great lyric. It's a great song.
And which track is that? I'm sorry.
The song's called Holocene.
That
And it just opens with a gorgeous line,
right. That is probably the most critically acclaimed song that that's on that album. Actually, from what I was researching today, like it's got a ton of it was a single that was released off the album, and it was actually one of the more like it won more awards and stuff. Which that album I actually think went gold or some in Europe. It was like so tons of records, dude. It's so hilarious. It's hilarious to me. It's so funny when like they preface this like gold in the UK. It's like, all right, it still sold a ton of freaking albums. Just because it didn't sell that over here doesn't like it's not less. I would love to sell a gold album in Europe right now. Yeah, let's go. So transitioning over, the Fleet Foxes' "Helplessness Blues," also released in 2011. Also the second studio album by this band, the Seattle band. Cover is also illustrated by two different people, Toby Libowitz. I'm messing these names up. And painted by Christopher Anderson. But what was really cool for this album was, for me personally, the vibe of the entire album is something I've personally been dealing with since I've heard the album. When I first heard the album and you're just getting out of college and you're like, the kind of the vibe of the album is like, I'm getting older and like, what have I done with my life type of stuff, right? And then like when you first get out of college, that's not a good question to ask yourself. Although it was presented to me personally for some reason. Then now that I've revisited this, it's something I'm kind of dealing with, right? So it was like really interesting for me. That's why I wanted to bring it up. This the same time period, same kind of genre and stuff, but it was something that really kind of change my mentality of how to think of like time's wasting. You know what I mean? Like you've got a finite amount of time. When I don't know why this album in particular did it for me, but just like Montezuma or whatever, the first song on the album, the first lyrics of the album. So now I'm older than my mother and my father when they had their daughter. Now what does that say about me? Like that lyric in particular just has always like, the older I get, messed with me. You know what I mean? For some reason, I don't know, like good or bad, what it says, but it just is giving me something to think about. So this album in particular has always been one that kind of, for one, changed my perspective on music because in 2011, that was 10 years ago, dude. So I had been like playing bluegrass and folk music for about 10 years. And I was just focused on competition level playing mandolin because that was kind of the only thing I had done really was trying to be a competitive mandolin player and not even really play studio. I played out a little bit. So just thinking about like, what have you accomplished? Have you literally like done things you wanted to do? And really what you really want to do when you play music is play with other people. You know what I mean? Like access that realm. So that was the first perspective change I had. And then this one is just like, all right, what did I accomplish since the last time? You know what I mean? So I love this album, dude. It's one of my favorites as far as composition as well because they have the layered things like you're talking about. And also, dude, two of the guys play mandolin. So it's like anybody who plays mandolin, dude, I'll listen to your music. Send me your music. Is there... we discussed this before a little bit off podcast. Is there interesting types of stories you've had with this band? Because you were telling me about something with these guys, and I like maybe get that on tape, man.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're interesting stories. I had an interesting story with Bon Iver where I got Craigslist tickets the day of the Merriweather show, and they were front row in this gigantic pavilion. I've seen Bob Dylan front row kind of in the same way. Where
that's the best when it's last minute tickets too, dude.
Yeah, I'll like never forget because like it was September, right after June or July when this record had come out, and I wanted to see them so bad. And like the day of the show, I think it was a September evening, and like I was approaching the venue and like this guy just like crossed the bridge, like handing me the tickets, and it was like and it was just bonkers, like seeing them that close. And there was a Richmond musician who was in the band at the time, Reggie Pace, who's in No BS.
Nice.
Who's pretty much one of the I think one of the founding members of No BS Brass, but just super talented. And that was kind of one of the connections I made too, was like, oh, a Virginia musician.
Definitely, yeah,
is in
yeah.
this band now, with playing with a songwriter that I really love and respect. And of course, I wasn't living in Richmond at the time, and now I love it. Now I love living here.
Yeah, dude.
But it was so cool because I think I was sitting in front of the horn section, so I was kind of in front of him and just very like proud. I was like Virginia proud.
Yeah,
like,
dude.
You know, kind of.
It's amazing that like
like this historic venue, and I could tell the band was really proud of being there in a way. And I think Reggie actually handed me the set list after
That's sick, dude.
after the show. So yeah,
Those moments, man. Those little moments
It's
where it
so
just like
meaningful,
cues you
man.
in. Yeah, it
it's
is.
important.
That's it is so important, and it's something that we're all from the performer to the audience, we're all deprived of right now. And it's so interesting because I'm so curious of how everything's gonna go back, right? And I hope that there were some flaws in the industry as a whole, and I hope we can kind of like adjust a little bit. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And one really cool thing is that you do personally a lot. I know you guys do the open mic and stuff, and you guys do a lot for other musicians. So I want to shout you out for that. Also, too, like, there's something to the camaraderie with that. With it's like you see someone from your home state, like that camaraderie, even being just he's from Virginia, like it's so amazing to me that that's kind of always brought people together. It's like just whatever you connect about, whatever it is, we can all kind of like get together and play some music, dude. I'm so excited about
Man,
that.
so,
When things like
so
start to kind of
important.
like,
It was so important for me to see that. I don't know. And I got to see Bob Dylan there, and like Will Copen. And I got to see them with my dad and his friend's daughter.
yeah,
I am blessed in terms of like live concerts, and I've seen Fleet Foxes a number of times, and they are like amazing, man. They're a blessing to the American music scene.
Yeah, dude. Some of the things, one of the other songs I loved about the album was The Plains and Bitter Dancer. It's such a journey with the vocals because the first is like them just basically like in almost like a church where they're just singing orchestrally. It's amazing, and it takes you on this like high and low type of beginning. And dude, a lot of times people have patience to sit there and listen to something and kind of just accept whatever the artist is giving to you, right? And so that's part of what I've enjoyed about doing this show is that I have to sit there and be like, all right, I'm going to listen to this album from front to back.
Mm-hmm.
And every now and then I just get my ADD kicks in or whatever. I get a little impatient. I'm like, man, I want to skip this track. But then being like, all right, I cannot skip this track. That adds something to it. I swear it does, dude. When you're just like, okay, I cannot skip this track. I've got to listen to everything through it. All of a sudden, you kind of like you give in to whatever you're listening to, almost, where you kind of give in to the vibe. You know what I mean? And that's been something that's the most interesting I've done throughout this entire journey. Is that from time to time you get to listening to stuff that not necessarily that you thought you would want to listen to or like listening to or whatever, you kind of give into it. I love that. But dude,
yeah, like at the time when it was, I think I was like 20 some, and I think the best compliment I could give to those guys is that I wanted to like learn from the record. Like I wanted to write songs like that, and it's like you aspire, you know, and
right?
It's like you want to write songs that good.
Definitely.
Like, when you hear your favorite artists writing songs like Bitter Dancer or Helplessness Blues or
that is a good song too.
The Shrine.
Yeah.
I mean, what the heck, man? The Shrine is just crazy, and it's so cool. It's so fun to hear kind of these songwriters totally pushing and focusing. That's what I don't understand is how these guys are able to focus so well. Because it's like I almost like
lock themselves in a room.
My grandmother was a quilter,
mm-hmm.
and she would make these big, beautiful quilts. And sometimes when I hear these records, I imagine these guys like going in and just sewing up these beautiful quilts. Because when you listen to them, they're colorful.
Right.
They're colorful.
So
records.
complex and colorful, right?
Seriously.
And so many like actual intricacies to, like.
They're not going into this like. They're not going into the studio as a band with these two records specifically.
Yeah, definitely.
I do not believe that they're going into the studio with the band and being like, okay, we're going to jam.
Yeah.
Like, I think that those guys had a lot of these songs.
Right. Although what I found with the Bon Iver album was that they specifically, or Justin specifically wanted it to not be perfect. which is
Yeah.
interesting. That
And I think that's a recording part of the process.
right, which is like it's like we you and
You
I
hear that in his music.
you and I may sit here and understand what not be perfect means, but the general listener to music doesn't really understand what the recording process of not being perfect means. Especially nowadays, right? Where you can go in and you can overdub stuff and you can just record layers on layers on layers of things and you can do a lot of different stuff. Having the most layered music that he could possibly have be simplistic as possible is very it was a very complex thing that like I never took into account to where I listened to it and he's like, from what I was reading, he was like, I don't want the harmonies to be exactly perfect, and I don't want all the guitar leads to be exactly perfect, and I don't want all the rhythms to be exactly perfect. And I'm like, you want the authenticity of the musicianship that you're doing, which is amazing that he can step back from his composer mind, because the composer's like, I'm gonna write this music and you have to play this music, right? He can step back from that just a little bit and go, okay, well, yeah, I don't want that. I want the rawness of it. You know what I mean? And which is very, very.
I was like just going through the Bon Iver record in my head, and I think every song on that record started with just one instrument.
Yeah.
Like Purse starts with the single electric guitar.
Right.
Minnesota has kind of like a. Holocene has that finger
picking. Yep.
And you keep going, and then it starts so simple.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's amazing.
Balanced. It's like so balanced. It's not simple.
It's not.
Balanced.
No, it's so funny that like that's the raw or authentic version, right? When it's so complex still to my ear, right? Both of these albums to me were very interesting to listen to. Very, I thought Fleet Fox's, the album I came up with, was his best I could come up with at the time, because I don't know this genre of music as well as I wish I did. Honestly, I spend too much time in my own bubble. But that's part of what we all do, right? Like we all listen to our own music, and sometimes we need to get out of that bubble and check out some other stuff.
Definitely.
What was the most interesting to me was Fleet Foxes, and I knew they had a mandolin player, but I didn't know that multiple members in their band played mandolin, which was like, oh, that's so cool, because I'm such a nerd for the instrument so the mandolin brought me to music. So for me, that's the instrument. I can learn everything else, but the mandolin is kind of the beginning rock, right? So whenever that kind of always is the key throughout everything. And I knew they had mandolin on certain tracks because I'd listened to this album before, but I didn't realize that multiple members of the band played mandolin until I did the research that I did within the last couple of days, and that was amazing to me. So that's kind of a cherry on top for this whole episode for me personally, because like that dude, again, when you grow up and you play a niche type of instrument like I did, like maybe a violin or mandolin. Mandolin's a lot more niche than violin is. You only think you can play like Bill Monroe or whatever, bluegrass or whatever, like that style of music, and then you hear an album like Fleet Foxes and you hear the mandolin on that, and you're like, man, that's actually opens the doors to a lot of different styles of music that I can play. I've just got to get around the right group of people and play that, and let them understand that I can do a lot of different things. So this was really a door opener for me for what I wanted to do, because I never wanted to play traditional music. Or I mean, not never, but I never, that's not what I always wanted to do. I love traditional bluegrass and traditional music, but it gets repetitive at some point. But not to go in on a negative note, but is there anything about the Fleet Foxes album that really jumps out, like tracks that you love, tracks that you listen to? I mean, to be honest with you, I'm kind of inverse with you on the first 3 tracks on the Fleet Foxes album, and the ones that spoke to me the most. Montezuma, like I said, was like the one where it really connects with me, where I'm just like, feel like I'm getting older.
Yeah. I love in the second one, I think it might be Bedouin Dress, but it's like,
yeah.
And then the piano comes in.
Yep.
If to borrow is to take and not
Yep.
return. And then that, like, it's like a fiddle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, out of nowhere. Out of nowhere too, which is amazing because he just
harmonies,
like boom hits you with the fiddle, dude. I love surprise
the
instruments.
break open later in that song where he's like, "One day at Innisfree."
Yeah.
So and that theme of Innisfree comes, I think, back around throughout the album. He's kind of playing with those lyrics and dropping like, kind of like with Justin Vernon, like dropping places. He wants to allude to places and like create kind of a fantasy world through his songwriting. And it's awesome. It's so cool, and it works. And like, excuse me, creating that like almost mythos in your music, right? The power in your song, the mythos of your song, and I think sometimes I'm just trying to think about something. Yeah, just I often look at like the pronouns that they're using in their songs or like the alliteration that they're using. Justin Vernon's songwriting is interesting because I'll often like start making up words. Like for example, on
very rapper-esque, you know.
Yeah, like on Hinam, it's like.
Yeah, that song is very like I'm gonna make up my own vocabulary.
And it's not necessarily even made up words, but it's so much about sound. And I think
as
a songwriter and as someone who loved English and loved reading, especially like growing up as a kid, knowing the words you're using and how they sound is like really important.
Absolutely.
Sand it starts to seal, solar peace, dirt and ice imed in cheeks, in the potter's field, strangers scattering, nether passage in the wind, off pennant tension ring. So it's like, it's just kind of this like impressionistic in the first of light, past the Noahide, bodies wrapped in white, stranded every pain, baby past her slain, I got out of LaGrange. All this time with your heart and mind, didn't you edit in Hinnom, go the least, and the precious feast, the invetted. The N-vetted. The invetted. It's like, what the fuck does that even mean? But it sounds so kind of alluring and interesting, and it's like a poem, you know? So when I first heard that and started reading the lyrics, as a songwriter, I was like, I don't have to always make perfect sense. I don't have to convey, you know, a rote feeling in my songs. Like, this is so freeing to read because it can be so about atmosphere. It can be so about the word instead of the word like and what it means.
Right. Yeah, dude, that's such a interesting way to say it, man. And I appreciate because I come from the opposite side of music where I just wanted to be really good at an instrument, and I wanted to find the other half where it'd be somebody like yourself who was so into the word, right? So that's so interesting to hear you say, and I'm so glad that you shared that with me because, dude, like I can write, I can put some words together and write a song, but the thought process that you just shared is nothing like what I go through, right? Where it's just like, that's the kind of the point of listening to songwriters like this when you can read their lyrics and kind of like learn from them, right? Is it not? Mm-hmm. Like, I think that I've been a sponge my entire life. I've had to learn from other musicians, and I never I didn't put as much time into the lyricist side as I did into the musicianship side. But like hearing your breakdown of it, it's the most I've really enjoyed it, dude. Thank you.
Cool, man. Oh man, thanks for letting me share because I respect his wordplay so much. I mean, both
absolutely, dude.
Songwriting is such a music's crazy because you've got composition, you've got kind of band, and then you've got songwriting itself and writing lyrics,
right?
And then matching the lyrics with the music.
There's meter, there's all these other things that comes along, like the poetry side of shit, where there's rhythm to the words, like you were saying, like there's rhythm to how you say things that maybe doesn't make sense, but also it makes sense tonically, like.
And like guys like McCartney and Lennon, like didn't have to think about it, like,
right?
God just gave them some kind of gift where they could take lyrics and melody, and it was just there.
Yeah.
And that's so special.
Very much so.
That's so special because you can have a really good songwriter who can like say beautiful words, but it's just G, C, D, E minor. And then you can have, Fish, or and I'm not saying Fish is amazing, but you can have like a jam band playing the craziest melodies, but they're not saying a damn thing. Like really, like they're not saying.
So finding the balance between the two is obviously what we're all trying to do.
That's why I love these records so much.
And that's something really that I feel like that all of us in our own way are all trying to do, really and truly. Like we're all trying to find the balance, and it's just whatever we decide is the balance, right, between musicianship and writer. And man, the way you described it was amazing. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that with us. And dude, man, I don't find any other better way to end this podcast, dude. So thank you for coming on, dude.
Blast, man.
I
Thanks,
hope
DJ.
you'll come on in the future, and appreciate everybody watching, dude. See you next week.